And we're
live?
live. Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's as 9:01 in Bayham, and I would call this meeting of the Rural Initiatives and Planning Advisory Committee to order. And thank everyone for joining us this morning to go through this grant program again. We have an agenda before us. Is there anyone requiring any additions? If not, I would seek a motion to approve the agenda. Need a mover and a seconder?
I want to question this because when was the agenda sent out? I do not seem to have an agenda. I have a meeting invite, I have the stuff from Dominique, but I don't have an agenda.
It was on Friday. No, it was before Friday.
And
Thursday.
who was it?
Thursday.
Who was it
Yep.
sent? Who sent it?
Carolyn.
Okay, I received only one thing from Carolyn on Thursday, and that was the Elgin County Emergency Operations. I did not receive anything else on Thursday from Carolyn because I've been looking.
So our email records show that it was sent, but it could be an IT issue, Councillor Martin.
I've had problems with a lot of things going to trash. I can look right now in trash and see if for some reason it's gone there. But I keep, this is happening quite often.
Okay,
I'm
well,
not getting things lately. Just
well,
give me a moment.
okay, and we'll resend it right now.
Okay, that would be helpful, please. Because I wondered why we didn't have. Not in trash.
Morning, Heather.
I must be losing my mind because I can never find the links to these.
Sally, do you, since you don't have the agenda, do you want a verbal approximation of what's going on?
Yeah, you can read. I think I know what we're doing, but I was looking for the updated report in it, etc.
Right.
I assumed there would be. So I looked over and over. I went back to the last one. I've looked. I know Carolyn sent me Dominique's sheet, but I don't know why. They're already just come through just now, so I can open it.
Okay, I believe, Julie, it's your intention to go through that draft report again in some detail. Would that suffice, Sally?
Is there, like it's downloading it at the moment. It takes a while where I live.
Well, can we proceed then with the motion to approve the agenda and go through the approval of the minutes while that's
Certainly.
downloading?
I have the minutes.
Okay.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, could Heather mute your microphone to perhaps help with the echo? Thank you. And I'll second the motion on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. So we have a mover. It's been moved by Gordon Mennel, seconded by Councillor Giguère to adopt the agenda, the approval agenda. I guess we're going through the recorded vote.
Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes.
Councillor Giguère, Councillor Giguère, Councillor Ketchaba,
Yes.
Heather Dirks.
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
Okay. Moving on, we have the two sets of minutes available for perusal and or approval. The minutes from the May 12th, 2020 meeting, as well as the minutes of the June 23rd, 2020 meeting. Unless there are any errors or omissions, I would expect perhaps a collective ballot will approve the minutes together. So looking for a mover and seconder.
So moved, Ed.
Thank you, David.
And I'll second.
Was that Dominique?
Yes.
Okay, so it's been moved by Warden Mennel, seconded by Councilor Jiguer to approve the minutes from May the 12th and June 23rd. All in favor?
Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchiba,
Yes.
Heather Dirks.
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Moving on then with Julie, your report on the draft Elgin County Community Grant Program, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee members. A draft community grant program was included in your agenda package, and this draft includes feedback from the most recent meeting. And today we are seeking the committee's consent for the overall program design. As well, we're seeking any recommended changes from the committee with respect to the document as presented, recognizing that it was pulled together pretty quickly, so that it's likely there are a number of areas that we want to pay close attention to and make necessary revisions to. And unless otherwise directed, we are still targeting a July 14th review by County Council, seeking their endorsement and approval for a revised community grant program. So getting right into the actual review of the document, the first page with a lot of content itself that we should review is page 2. So this provides a general overview of the community grant program itself, which shows that there's an overarching grant program and 2 significant substreams. One is for community services and one is for events and festivals. And within each of those substreams, there are 2 programs. One is a seed grant, and that is targeting applicants who are looking to research, test, and launch a new service, event, or festival. And the other is a grow grant, which is to renew, enhance, or expand the festival, event, or service.
Julie,
Yes.
right there, you said or expand, and that's been a concern of mine because sometimes they're not going to expand, but they still form a great thing. And it says and expand in your document. I'm quite willing to have or expand. But I'm sorry, but some of the fairs, they're all volunteers that are working at them. They work extremely hard to do something that is a great service to their community. And they can't always be expanding. And I don't think we should be limiting them to applying for a grant if they have to be expanding.
So we could have and or. So renew, enhance, and or expand. Does that satisfy the committee's intent?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Dominique. I would be fine with just or.
Okay.
I think,
I mean, and or, but definitely the intent is not and. The intent is not to expand all the time. You could renew something or enhance something or expand something or a combination thereof.
I would agree with that interpretation, Dominique. I think that would work fine.
Great. So we'll make that revision.
And could we do the same with the launch? Because it could be in the seed grant that you research and you test something and you may decide not to launch. So I would put an or there as well. Thank you.
Certainly. So that will require revision throughout the document. So we've noted that, and we'll make sure that that is revised throughout. So then there is another type of program that falls within the community grant program, but is separate and distinct from the festival or event program or the community services program or intake, and that is the community signage program. So it's my recommendation that since this is an established program that has been in place for a number of years, and any sort of significant changes to this program would be a major undertaking. That we keep it status quo and just have a quick look at the program to make sure that it is still in line with what the committee had in mind. But generally that program remains unchanged. And the focus of the revised community grant program is really to develop the community services intake and events and festivals intake.
I would agree with that. I have been involved in the community signage program several times, actually, for not-for-profit groups. When Elgin County and the city separated, Elgin County, or at some point anyway, we had signs up before for museums or volunteer, community things, and they automatically put them all back up. The county did when they replaced things at no cost, because that was part of what we'd done originally. Now I know it's limited to 2 signs. So if a group who have not had signs before, a not-for-profit group wants signs, they have to, there are 2 signs available. They choose the locations. And I've been involved with one in Sparta for that as well. The hardest thing I find is the old signs that I had, they caught people from both directions on the road. This way, they only catch them from one direction in 2 places instead of 2 directions in 2 places or 3 places or whatever it was, because we had quite a number of signs for our Forge Museum, just so you know what I'm talking about. The Forge and Anvil Museum, which is strictly a volunteer group, we had 2 signs in various locations. But when we opened the Church Museum, we were only allowed 2 signs, period. And that seems to be the intent of the program now. So I'm just curious about that, because it's hard sometimes to know where do you put just 2 signs when you'd like one to catch them coming east and west or north and south. And maybe it's like for Sparta, they're on John Wise Line, they're on Highway 4. There are 4 of them. So I'm just curious what the thoughts are on that, because that is part of that program.
So we'll just ask Alan Smith to comment on that.
Okay. Councillor Martin, yes, quite correct. Initially, we did have several signs available to not-for-profits, then we went down to 2. We did think about having a sign that had the signage on both sides of one sign. However, engineering did not agree to that. We also had to limit the amount of signage due to signage saturation. Right now, there are certain areas of the county which are overly signed, let's say. And so we had to cut back on that, and also to reduce the number of grants available to each individual organization. So it was a matter of engineering, it was a matter of signage clustering, and a matter of reducing the amount of grants available to not-for-profit organizations.
Thank you, Alan. I understand. Sorry, Ed, through you.
Yes.
Alan, I understand the saturation. I know Highway 4, aiming towards Sparta and Port Stanley, they're all there together right near Union, and there are a lot of signs. And I know you've tried to spread them out and put no more than, I think, 4 in a section. But they can be distracting. I am fully aware of that. And I was curious, because we had 4 originally, as I mentioned, but then we were allowed 2 under the new one when we opened the new museum. And then, as you know, they did 2 for Sparta through the community hall. But anyway, I'm glad you gave that explanation. I understand it better, and I'm willing to agree to it.
Thank you.
Okay, just a question for staff. Is there anything precluding the particular organization from acquiring their own signs to match those available through the community signage program? Other than perhaps permission from the county to display them, or the other, the lower tier?
Yeah, so individual organizations can purchase additional signs, and with consent of engineering and through the regulations provided within this document and through the signage program, they are able to install additional signage.
Okay.
But those,
Okay.
yeah, Ed,
Yep.
just so you know, those have to be the blue and white signs that are county.
Yes.
That's all they allow on county roads. So an individual business or organization can't just go and put up, any old sign anywhere, because Central Algonquin now has regulations. I don't know about the other municipalities, but the only place that can be are these blue and white ones on county roads. And if an area is saturated, I would assume the county have the right to say no.
Yes.
I would agree. My question was simply, was there anything precluding other than engineering saying no from a private organization from acquiring additional signs on at their own expense? So, the community signage program, by providing funding for up to 2 or an opportunity for up to 2 signs, I think is still fairly generous.
Mhm.
I agree.
Okay. One question for you, Julie, since you're taking us through this presentation, do you want to wrap up through the community signage program right now, or do you want to allow for some questions later on? I've got a question on page 31 of your presentation.
Okay, I think we can bounce around the document as much as necessary today.
Okay.
Because so much of it is interconnected with other sections of the document. So I'd suggest that when you have a question or some feedback, let's go to the relevant section and make those revisions.
Okay, my question deals with Appendix C.
Okay.
Okay, I got mine here. Actually, it deals with the tourism membership costs based on signage size. Why is there 2 different tourism membership costs? The smaller sign has a $200 membership cost. The larger sign is a $100 membership cost. I assume that's just a typo.
It is a typo, and that's a great catch. So that's precisely the type of feedback we're seeking today, just to make sure, because as mentioned, I pulled this together very, very quickly for the committee's review. So we'll note that revision. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for signs for me. Anyone else?
Great. So if we jump back to the bottom of page 2, there is a note that I also think we need to clarify, which is applicants can only submit 1 application to each stream per year. And I think this should be, this should note that unless a second intake is opened. Because applicants can submit more than 1 if we have 2 intakes a year. So that we'll make that revision as well. Just circling back to the community signage program, I will note that it was an error that the application for the community signage program is missing from this document. So it is an established application that we would just insert into this document.
Okay.
So any general feedback from the committee with respect to the program design?
You, Mr. Chair, it's Dominique.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to say thank you for incorporating some of my suggestions. So thanks to staff and to the committee. So to me, I think it is a bit clearer in terms of conveying how dynamic we want this grant program to be. And so my only comment, sort of jumping way ahead down to the application, because I think in the introduction, it does a good job of explaining the research, test, or launch, or renew, enhance, or expand. What I didn't see as much is that concept then being repeated more explicitly in the application or in the criteria. So one suggestion was, I think it was down on page 19 or 39. I guess it's page 19 of the, or page 39 of the application. Sorry, of the package that we have today.
I think it's actually page 29.
Page 19. Yeah. So so page 29 of the package, page 19 of the document. And so the very first question, when it says provide details of the initiative, including the objectives, operation, projects, activities, event, I found that very broad, especially for 200 words. So maybe just saying we just need a general description. And then immediately after, I would suggest to say, describe which, what are you seeking to do? Are you expanding? Are you enhancing? Are you trying something new? And then describe what is new. So right there, then it's obvious, and I think it confirms or reinforces the main objective of the program.
Great.
Ed, may I?
Yes, please, Sally.
I'm having a hard time with the title GROW grant because even if they're enhancing it, I don't think of enhancing a program like a fair in some ways as a way of growing, that it's not growing it in that sense. I'm not certain. I'm just having a hard time with the GROW one. I understand the seed grant, and that's to help those who are getting started at something, but sometimes it's more of a maintain and enhance, but not necessarily grow. So I just am having a hard time with the term GROW grant, that I think some people are going to assume if we're not growing and getting bigger, then we can't apply. I think it's going to discourage quite a few people, would be my feeling.
Have a suggestion for wording, Sally?
I know we were hoping, I mean, we're trying to align with the strategic plan, but could it be maintain and grow grant so that it doesn't just say grow?
If I may, Mr. Chair, I would advise against anything that says maintain, because as I said, I think we want to convey that you need to be dynamic as an organization. And even in a previous meeting, I think Councillor Martin did talk about how growth is not necessarily numbers or size. Growth is, I mean, you learn something. So it's grow. To grow as an organization means we're going to try something new. We're going to challenge ourselves to enhance perhaps our programming and try to reach additional audiences. Maybe we want a younger crowd at our festival or at our fair. And so perhaps the actual number of attendees will be exactly the same, but as an organization, you're growing. And I mean, it's not perhaps the ideal word. I can't think of a different word but as long as we're clear that growth is not size. Growth is as an organization, you're constantly reflecting, learning,
So perhaps if we were to maintain the title or the program name GROW Grant, we could elaborate on the description to include some other examples. So when I think about growing and using those learnings year over year, it would be, how can we ensure that our event is fully accessible moving forward? How can we invite other partners or stakeholders to participate in our event? Those types of opportunities certainly reflect, I think, Councillor Giguère's notion for GROW Grant. Am I on point here, Councillor Grant or Councillor Giguère?
Yes, absolutely. I think providing as many many examples will help maybe getting
Yeah.
around that, because it could be growing revenues, so it growing your sponsorship. It could be growing awareness. Yes.
Mhm.
I must admit, I still have a hard time. I agree explaining it. I'm just worried we're going to turn some people off, because having been involved in many volunteer organizations, and I know sometimes how burned out some people can be, they may just see that and say, I'm sorry, but to heck with this. I'm not going to do anymore. I can't. I'm giving way too much time already. And so, like, I don't want to see things collapse because we've said grow and they don't understand what we mean. And yes, it might be in there, but I can see the title just saying, well, we don't fit in that. We can't apply.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to see some way to change that title a bit. Whether it may not be maintained, but some way that people realize that we're not telling them, just because you have it, that, if you make a change in your fair or the displays or whatever, or competition or whatever you do, that is considered growth, even though, you're not growing in numbers. But I just feel we're really going to turn a lot of people away, because they're going to see that those are the only grants we have, are seed grants and grow grants, and we don't fit in either one of those. So what are we going to do? Shall we just close this thing down?
Okay. Page 2, going back, you have a short definition of grow and seed grants. I'm wondering, Julie, if you might expand in your glossary of terms and perhaps expand what definition of grow grants, seed grants, perhaps just to provide a little more clarity. I understand exactly where you're coming from, Sally. We don't want to discourage people from applying, but at the same time, it seems to me one of the objectives is to not make this as just a sustaining funding source. We want to encourage people to be innovative and move forward. So perhaps I misunderstand, and ultimately council is going to make a decision on this. But I would be happy with just expanding the definitions a little bit within the application. I don't know how Heather or Dave feels about that. Those are my thoughts.
Perhaps we can, I think we're getting caught down the weeds. Perhaps we can have an example of what grow means. So, people don't get caught up with thinking they have to expand.
Yep. Okay. Heather?
If I may, sorry.
Just firstly, nice pun, Dave, caught in the weeds on a grow grant. But say, I get where Sally's coming from, and we may see smaller events with COVID, and I don't know if it's the right word, but I think that the problem could be solved with the descriptor. I know we're looking at a lot of online events, virtual events in the agricultural world, and that would be growing into new directions, I suppose. But yeah, I see where Sally's coming from, but I do think it could be solved with better description.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
just throw out a couple of alternate program names. One might be a nurture grant or a cultivate grant. So you'd have a seed grant and a cultivate grant. Is that, would that help, Sally?
I like that much better. I just think we're going to see, I know with Trillium grants, when they changed, a lot of people looked at the new titles and said, I don't fit under either title, and they didn't read any further. So I think I like that idea. That's just me. I've been involved in a lot of volunteer groups and applied for grants, and it's a hard work because it takes a lot of time. And when you're all volunteers, it's hard to find the time for all these things. and to put all the energy into it and then feel like, you're being thwarted.
I like the word cultivate. I think it is probably expands the potential, and it's loose enough where it could probably encompass anybody that's applying.
Well, okay.
So, Mr. Chair, I will just add that we want to be careful, because if it catches everything, then that means we don't have a criteria. So I would not go that far. I think it is perhaps clearer to say cultivate, because it means what we want to say is that you need to work. And I understand the volunteer nature of these organizations. That's where most of my work is. And I fully understand what the burnout is. I also fully understand that what brings new energy and with burnt out boards and volunteers is when we try something new and we're nudged a little bit. And I think that's our job, to nudge and to push in the application process, to push organizations to think a little bit and actually generate energy, not burnout. So I can live with cultivate.
Great.
I'm kind of hearing consensus, so there you go.
Great. So I think cultivate does still capture that development piece and the renew, enhance, expand. So I think we'll rework some of the language, we'll rename it, and we should be able to move forward from here.
Okay.
So 2 key pages in the documents talk about application timelines. So
Yes.
I just wanted to check in and make sure that for intake 1, the committee is comfortable with a fall intake that would have a final submission date of November 1st.
Okay, in your
It's
descriptor,
November
or right
10th.
now it's November 10th.
Sorry, November 10th.
Okay,
Yes.
I don't have a problem with that. What's the current application date?
Good question. Alan, would you know?
For festival events, it would be, is it mid-April?
Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to collapse it all into one, so yes.
Mhm.
My concern will be some of the fairs are fall fairs, and they wouldn't even have gotten over this year's fair before they have to apply for next year's if they're looking for a grant. Because I know some of the West fairs are in the fall. I mean, I think they need to have at least completed their event and evaluated its success and failures, and before they start applying for the next one. That was all my concern.
So on a go forward basis, those event reports would be due November 1st. So would that work with the local events and fairs, Councillor Martin?
Oh, yeah, as far as, reporting on the past one, but if you're not going to apply September 1st for, say, 2020s, you're going to apply for 2021's September 1st. And if you haven't had your event for 2020, I'm just, using that, how do you decide what you apply for? Or, I want them to base it on realistic things according to what had happened and how they might change. But if you haven't even held your event yet, you're not planning how you're going to change it next year.
Mr. Chair, the way I read it is that the applications open in September, but not due until November the 10th. Most fall fairs are done long before November.
Well, I think so, and I think you've had opportunity to do a post-mortem on your event, and you're already thinking ahead, and I think there'd be sufficient time to get your application in. If not, then there's a spring application, providing there's money available still. So we're still dealing with the application deadline date. if we take the festivals and events out of it, the grant program now has a November deadline date, does it not?
Yes.
Okay.
That's fine then.
Yeah, I'm thinking we should try it and go with there. Okay, Julie, moving forward.
Great. So the second intake would open May 15th and would close July 10th.
Okay, that's on the second page. Can we back up one?
Certainly.
Can you please through one more time for me, because I'm having a hard time following the November 1st, 2021 final submission date. I don't understand that line.
So this fall, we would accept all applications, and then they would be required to submit funding agreement forms and funding reports a year from November, this fall.
So you're saying the 2020 is due on November 21st. That's the one
Oh, you're right.
I'm having problems with that
Yes.
because it seems to me it's a full year out of context with the application.
So that is the same error I made in the previous report. My apologies.
Okay.
It's the 2020 final report that is due and accepted November 1st, 2021. So we're looking
right.
at the previous year, though we should discuss when the committee hopes to receive funding agreement forms, because I have the same submission date as November 1st for both, but really they can't submit a final report for an event if they haven't submitted a funding agreement, because they won't have received funding for the event.
I
So
was going to say, would not the funding agreement forms need to be submitted before the check is forwarded to them?
yes,
So
so maybe 30 days with, once we provide notice that they will receive funding, that funding agreement form is due within 30 days.
Mr.
in my
That makes
opinion,
sense. Yes.
yeah, that makes sense. And I was just going to ask Sally, like your experience with some of these organizations, they can mobilize pretty quick to get these agreements authorized.
I would think the agreement's not a problem. Yeah, and the final report, to me, the final report, we could make it such that it has to be submitted 30 days after the event
True.
instead of a set deadline, because for November 1st, somebody who has a program in, say, May or June, that's a long time later that they submit their final report. I would think we should give them a month or 2 months at the most to submit their final report after their event.
I
know
think,
it's going to make it harder, but
well, I think from a best management practices point of view, I think you're right. The organization should do it while it's still fresh in their mind. From a tracking perspective, I think it'd be a nightmare for our staff to figure that out. That's why I'm wondering
Yeah.
if a fixed deadline date of November 1st works, but maybe an encouragement somewhere, encourage you to get your final reports done within 30 days of your event. If that could be worded in there someplace.
Certainly. So I would suggest that final reports be submitted within 60 days,
Yeah,
but no later than November 1st. And that's because they have to have submitted a final report in order to be eligible to apply for the next round of funding.
that's
That makes
where my
sense.
confusion was on this. Okay, thank you. Does that work for committee members?
I'm good.
yes,
Mr. Chair, just a couple of comments. So this is the same, we're looking at the same timelines for services and programs, right? Not just for events. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
So I could see where that could get confusing if it's a service that's offered, year round. Then when do you determine what is 60 days out after what? So I think it's one of those either or. So
Yep.
either 30 to 60 days after your event or with a deadline. My other question is, if we are encouraging, especially for some events, to apply earlier, I find the window, like the notification of March, to be quite late for board to not know until March when they're doing bookings, very likely in January and February. So could we move that up, which also would move the agreements up as well, assuming, and I know we want to coincide with the budget, I'm wondering if we can move that up to February.
I think we certainly could move it up. We could move it up even to January. We wouldn't have the flexibility of seeking additional funds through council. If you know, I designed these timelines to account for perhaps the off chance that the committee receives 25 incredible submissions and wants to recommend that additional funds be granted to the committee to distribute for the programs and services, in which case you wouldn't have final budget approval until end of March or mid-March, which is why I chose that timeline. But if the committee, if that's not the desire of the committee, we could push that timeline right up to January.
Yeah, I would hate to penalize the, you know, people who worked hard and got it in early and then sit in limbo in the event that, you know, the committee wants or needs more time to consider additional applications or budgeting. So it would be too much of a committee-centric application process. I'd like to really be in support of the organizations and let them know ASAP. So perhaps we can separate and the committee can make those recommendations and at the same time go back to council with a request for additional fund in the budget. So those that are approved by the committee, then they can be notified.
The only issue I have with that is if the committee decides that they're going to allocate across the entire site, let's call it 25 applications, and then go back and seek additional funding, I don't see that working. I like to maintain as much flexibility in these things as you can. I don't have a problem with the March funding notification date, but I'm willing to compromise on this.
If we said March 1st, then that would be, to me, acceptable. The end of March would be tough, in my opinion.
So I just have another thought, and that is perhaps the ask for council would be for funding to support a second intake. So you could do the first round of applicants and provide notice January, February, and then if you did have great applicants who you couldn't fund, you'd encourage them to apply for the second intake and seek additional funds from County Council through the 2021 budget deliberation process.
Yeah. Well, it's a compromise. What's the committee think of that?
I think it makes sense that.
Okay. Monique, I see you shake or nodding.
Sorry, through you, Ed, if I was applying, if this timeline was published, I would be watching the council agendas to see what the committee recommended and get a sense of whether my grant was being considered. I don't think they're going to sit there blindly biting their nails. I think if they're active, these documents are published. I think to me, they're going to have a sense of whether it's being considered, at least if they follow the agenda. So I don't have a problem with beginning of March or whatever the date is in March.
Okay. Sally, you're good?
I'm okay.
Okay, thanks. So I'm hearing consensus that March is fine. But if we wish to go through an earlier adjudication of these, the committee and then come back and ask for more funding, it may not work, but it's an avenue.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
what if we said March 1st, just to be consistent that every time we ask them something, they have to commit to a date, and to be fair, we should commit to a date as well.
It would be consistent with the other timelines that are listed. Yes?
Great.
Okay,
So
thanks.
we'll make that revision. So intake 2 is a little bit more complicated, and I'd like the committee's direction in one key area. So we do require for the community grant program that organizations submit a final report before they're eligible to apply for successive years. So how does that work if an applicant applies to intake 1 and applies to intake 2? Do we waive the requirement for a report in order for them to be eligible?
My understanding was that the second one, intake 2, was strictly for something new, a seed grant to help them either research or start something new. So I don't think they have to have a report from their other one that is an ongoing one that they've got the other grant for. I think this is a whole new thing when they're applying for a seed grant, and it's only going to be a one-time grant, at least for research. It may be for implementation another time, but I don't see that the final report for the other grant, because this is only a seed grant. This is something new. That's my
I would
thought.
concur. Yeah, I concur with that.
Concur as well. I think that would reflect our initial discussion of wanting some flexibility of something that doesn't exist and therefore cannot match a specific timeline.
Great. So can the same organization have submitted for a seed grant through intake 1 and a different seed grant through intake 2?
Well, according to what you've got earlier in the application, they're only allowed to apply for one, but I would assume that's an established organization. But if we're talking about something innovative and new, does the committee want to make allowances for that? And as Sally would indicate, this is a one-time opportunity only on that particular event or research or whatever.
I would recommend just the one application, and in fact, currently.
Just one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you're applying for a seed grant in October, I doubt you already have something new in addition, 6 months later.
Agreed.
So it's either or.
No, the planning takes years, a year. It's not going to happen like that, I don't think.
Yeah. You got consensus on that, Julie?
Yes, that's clear, and we'll reinforce that in this package. I just want to touch in on the dates. So the application submission period would open May 15th. And is that early enough, or should we push that up to March?
Yeah, I think it should be March, because these new events are probably going to happen, there could be in the summer.
Yeah.
So I think March should be the deadline, or the opening of the submissions, maybe deadline the end of April.
So if for some reason a seed grant wasn't approved in the first round, we wouldn't be notifying them until March 1st. So I
Right.
think we want to allow enough time for them to put together an application for intake 2.
Well, would roughly a 60-day window give them enough time? No? Sally's suggesting the deadline be the end of April, so April 30th or something?
Great.
So that would bump up your adjudication process, of course, rather than August, this could be done.
Yeah, I really agree with Chris as well, because as you said, there's going to be things that are under Dean's umbrella that Chris is going to have to pick up that he wasn't picking up before.
Mute the warden's line.
Yeah.
Okay, so we would move up the application submission date to April 30th. Application deadline would be June 10th. And the Rural Initiatives and Planning Advisory Committee would submit recommendations to Elgin County Council in July. And we would notify applicants August 1st. So it still doesn't seem like a condensed enough timeline in order to perhaps achieve some of the initiatives these groups hope to achieve in this year. So August, so it would only give them 5 months to complete a program.
Yeah.
So do you want
I
to?
don't,
Oh, sorry.
that's okay. I was just going to say, if I were having a one-time event, a new thing, and I don't mean the research one or that, but if I were going to have a new festival or something new, I would expect it would be, you know, in July or August or September at the latest. And so I think letting them know they had funding in August doesn't make any sense to me unless it's something for the next year.
I think I made some earlier comments, not today, but previous meetings, that a lot of these events and things that are going to be innovative, they're still going to be planned out well in advance, I would think. So I don't actually, in my mind, see much uptake in the secondary application process. I think it's all going to be fall applications.
Okay.
In my mind, but again, whatever the committee's wishes are. If you want to maintain and preserve that, then we have to set a timeline that works for that particular process.
Well, that's why I was suggesting start 1st of March and the end of April, and let's know the end of May whether we're getting funding or not.
Mr.
We
Chair.
probably won't.
Yeah. Dominique?
Sure. I was going to say, I had envisioned, based on previous discussions, that this would be very small. This was just to leave ourselves some flexibility for organizations who just discovered this grant. They're new, and so I could see, I had envisioned an accelerated process, because I think we may be talking about 1 or 2 applications. So the whole process, from a staff's perspective, from committee and council, I think could be quite accelerated. This is like a secondary, it's not, I don't see it as equal to the main intake. This is just a little pocket for a little bit of flexibility.
I would agree with you. I absolutely do. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree too. That's what I was going to say. We won't have many in this one.
No. So is it possible then for staff to have the review, if these things are received April 30th, to have the review, to get it out to the committee in a couple of weeks so that we could make recommendations the end of May or even 1st of June, the council? Is that going to work? And this thing be funded by the end of June?
For sure. So I think the committee would know how much funding was remained in the program, and you could open up submissions April 1st. You could receive, you could have a quick turnaround for applicants, either 30 to 45 days, and you could complete the application, you receive all the applications and conduct the committee review the latter part of May and first part of June, and council review, say, the second meeting in June, and notify all applicants by July 1st.
Right.
Does that get us closer?
Gets closer, but I think what Sally's getting at is that some of these events may actually have occurred before they even get any funding from the county. And I appreciate what she's saying on that.
I still like the March. Submit in March, give them, 45 days to submit. So mid-April, we have it all. We make a decision early May, goes to council, the first meeting in May, and they know before the end of May whether they have funding or not, because you're not going to go ahead if you have no funding and you have no other way to get it for part of it, or you're going to be very reduced in what you can do.
Okay.
Okay.
So perhaps a March 15th, 30 to 45 days, and then we'll adjust the other timelines accordingly in order to achieve a June 1st notification deadline for applicants, both successful and unsuccessful.
Is that a March 15th opening period or a March 15th deadline for application? Opening?
Opening.
Well, it could be, but why couldn't it open back up after March 1st? That's the deadline for the first, notification.
So I'm including the date of March 15th or suggesting it only because if you were securing additional funds from council for a second intake,
Right.
then I think that is a reasonable timeline to assume that council has approved the 2021 operating and capital budgets, but.
All right. Okay, thank you.
But it could be earlier if you had leftover funds from intake 1. So.
Yeah.
It's really the committee's preference here and comfort level with publishing that date of March 1st. If you have, well, I guess it's pretty clear that a second intake is subject to available funds.
Yes.
So it's ultimately at the committee's discretion, and we could, in that case, put a March 1st deadline or earlier, because you'll have issued the other funding notifications in January. So you'd have some sense of whether there's money available, and having received intake 1 submissions, you'll have some sense too of how many unsuccessful applicants you may have that reapply to a second intake.
Right.
And maybe if we did open up the intake to February, then we could just extend the submission period to 60 days.
Okay. Whether it's 60 days or not is irrelevant. I think the point is if there is going to be a secondary program out there, that at least be early enough in the season for people to take advantage of it for the summer months. I think that's what the concern of the committee is all about.
Sure. So we'll redesign the timelines to achieve that committee direction.
Okay, thank you.
So assuming that the majority of committee members had a chance to review kind of qualifying organizations and the descriptions for each of the grants, we could skip through that. So there is a general page in your agenda package, page 16 for community services, page 17 for events. Any feedback on either of those kind of general descriptions?
No,
Eligibility, oops, sorry.
Please carry on. I think we're good.
Okay, great. So eligibility, we used the committee's feedback that we received at the last meeting to inform the eligibility. Just wanted to make sure the committee felt that it was clear. And if you were applying to the program, you'd be able to tell pretty quickly whether your organization was eligible to apply. Great. So eligible expenses is the next section that I've included, and that includes allowable expenses and expenses that are not eligible. I wondered if the committee felt that we needed a section that says allowable programs or any other information here that would help guide applicants in their application process. So, we want them to be able to tell from the document whether what they're planning is going to be in line with what the committee hopes to achieve. And alternatively, if we know right now that there are certain things that we won't be supporting, this is the place to list it. So we've included operating expenses, capital projects, deficit reduction, any retroactive activity, HST, and any programming that doesn't have a direct measurable impact on our residents. But is there anything that we're missing?
I think if you want to itemize out a particular list, it could be quite exhaustive. So
Yes.
I think that keeping it as general as you've got it is fairly self-explanatory to me.
Great.
Yeah.
And I did review, or I did make sure to include that other expenses are reviewed on a case-by-case basis to give the committee the opportunity to discuss it and see how it fits with the criteria.
Chair, I wasn't actually clear on operating expenses. When I look at previous applications of running a festival, I guess I started questioning what do we actually mean by that. So it wasn't clear to me. And the other one that stands out is because here we're talking about expenses, the last bullet suddenly talks about programming that does not have a direct measurable impact. And I feel that that doesn't belong there. That's already explained somewhere else, that we want your programming to have a direct impact. So I would remove the programming, and if we could clarify what we mean by operating expenses as not being eligible, what would be an example?
Yeah, my understanding is when we talk about operating expenses, for one, we're talking about expenses directly to operating that particular organization, not the event. I think the grant program, you want to have it there so it helps fund the event, not funding the day-to-day operational expenses or the activities of a particular organization. Like, why are you paying for the bookkeeping services for a fair board or something like that? Whereas you could be using that money to help pay for some of the events directly related to the running of the fair itself. Does that make sense? But maybe some clarification on that from staff would help.
Certainly. So I included operating expenses, intending that it exclude wages, staffing costs, benefits, those types of costs. And when I included it, I had the community services grant in mind.
Right. Could you simply have like brackets with an example of those particular operating expenses included in there for clarification?
Certainly.
And regarding, yeah, okay, thanks, Sally. And then the programming, I understand why it's there because we kind of want to have, I guess, in my mind, it's a reminder that we're looking for things that benefit or have a direct measurement benefit the county residents. So you're right in one respect, Dominique, that it is listed elsewhere.
Yeah, because so I think in fact there are two items: the retroactive activity program and programming that does not have a direct impact. Those are not actually expenses. I think those two items are actually explained somewhere else. And I did notice there's a bit of repetition, and there's room to streamline the package to make it more accessible. And those would be two examples that we're only talking about actual costs in this list. We're not talking about the type of programming.
Great.
Okay.
So is there a need in this section to define what eligible programs festival events exist, or is that sufficiently covered elsewhere in the document?
I believe it's sufficiently covered.
Great.
Yep, I would agree.
Just one comment on that. Sometimes you can read something once in one place and you may not remember it later. I mean, having been a teacher for 32 years, they always told us you had to teach something 15 times before the average person absorbed it and it was part of them. So I don't feel badly about repeating it here, that those things are not being considered in case they missed it the first time. But I don't care. If we don't want to put it in, that's fine too.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So the review process is the next section of the document. And I just recaps what we discussed at our last meeting, which is staff review the applications for completeness. We'll have finance conduct a preliminary financial analysis. Then we'll compile an agenda with complete applications for the review by the committee. And then the committee uses program-specific scoring matrices, which we haven't developed yet, to score each program and each application. And then you do that individually, then you meet and go through the group scoring and make your recommendation to council at a meeting or two. And we'll group the applications as excellent, fair, or failed. So anyone who doesn't achieve a score of 60, we won't provide funding, but we'll perhaps provide feedback to those groups and organizations about how they could reapply in the future and what sorts of things that we're looking for. And following Elgin County's council's approval, we'll notify everyone whether they're successful or not. And that's the process. So is there any sort of revisions that need to be made to the review process, or are you comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Great. So funding, we've reinforced in the first line that applicants can apply for up to 50% of the project, service, or event expense up to a maximum of $10,000. And grants won't exceed that 50% in order to spread the funding across the county. And then there's a list of other things for applicants to keep in mind. And perhaps, as Councillor Jiguer mentioned, this is one area that could be streamlined so that we're not duplicating information throughout the document. Just wanted to get this information before the committee in case there was anything that stood out that needs to be revised or eliminated. Be happy to make those revisions.
Not hearing anything, Julie.
Great. So I did leave a section blank, which was program criteria for community services. And with some general feedback from the committee, I think I could take that feedback and rework what types of programs we're trying to encourage that organizations put forward as submissions. So is there something you had in mind for this stream?
Well, one I would see is targeting specific, it could be specific age groups or demographics. It could be specific to mental health or, you know, assisting people with disabilities. Like there are a lot of areas that we could list, and I would almost like to, with this, sit down myself and go through what I think, and possibly all of us could, and then send them to you so that you could then come up with a combined list that would make sense.
Certainly.
and this is an area where I felt it was getting a little bit repetitive, just so, because I feel so right at the beginning, when we just described the grant program, there is a definition of what we're looking for, which to me would have been the same as the assessment criteria. And then later on, when page 16, under community services, there's another paragraph that also describes the type of program. It's a slightly different version than the paragraph on page 3. So I just want to be careful that either, I don't mind the repetition if it's exactly, if we're saying the exact same thing. So that then it's not confusing. But if it sounds the same, it's just a slightly rewording in 3 different places, then that may become more confusing.
For sure. So if we skip ahead to events and festivals program criteria, this may help the committee see what I'm hoping to achieve. So it was a little easier because these were already established for our event and festival program. So we've listed that the criteria for those events are that the admission to the event has to be free or low cost. Targeted audience is listed there. It can't be used for sponsorship. They have to get permits and clearances and insurance. So those are the qualifiers in order to, it's that next level of detail and criteria for those who are interested in applying for that stream. So I was hoping to achieve the same for the community services stream. So is there a set of criteria that is required for those who are applying to say that, they have to recognize that this funding is coming from the County of Elgin, and they have to include our logo and those types of criteria is what I was hoping to gather.
Okay.
So I think it would be very similar. A lot of them apply in terms of accessibility and no sponsorship, recognition. So I would say a very similar list, so you could repeat the list, because I suspect that if I pick a stream, can the package be divided so then I'm not reading the same information? So would I get a specific, once I pick my stream and my type of grant, would I only see this once then?
We could certainly develop 2 separate packages, if that's what you mean, one for community services and one for festivals and events, and perhaps a third one for signage.
Right.
And it's very clear, and then it doesn't matter if we repeat, it's not confusing because it's only for my application.
Yeah, and the reason why we put it all into one document initially was so that applicants could review the general criteria and determine where they best fit and where their applications should go. So as long as we have that introductory section that is in each one of the 2 packages, at least for the community services and festival of events grant, I think we're okay. It would certainly make it easy on the website to have 3 buttons to press, and we could have 3 print PDFs available, 3 application processes. So we can streamline it. That's great feedback.
Okay, thank you.
I like that package, defining which one you're looking for, and it makes things a lot simpler, I think.
Yep.
So the assessment that I've listed next is something that I was hoping we would use to build the scoring matrices for each one of the programs, recognizing that we'll now have a signage matrix. We'll have 2 for community services and 2 for festivals and grants. So 5 tools total.
Right.
I thought we needed to really define and lay out for the applicants, what are we looking at specifically? And then we can craft a scoring matrix based on your feedback. But I didn't want to get too far out ahead of the committee and try to design a scoring matrix until we checked in on whether you consented to the criteria that we've listed here. So needs and impact, efficiency and collaboration, and transparency and accountability. And as I reflected on your the feedback you provided about the scoring matrix we've been using, these were kind of the key areas that you identified needed to be defined and needed to be reworked. We're open to any feedback.
This is one area where I would really like to see a fourth category related to that cultivation, renewal, enhancement. So I'm fine with what is there. The second one is a little bit hard to interpret. I was trying to put myself both in the shoes of an applicant and as a adjudicator on the committee. And I thought, what would that look like? What would I be looking for in the application that would help me? So that one, not sure if it's as clear as it can be, but definitely if we could add a fourth related to that cultivation aspect or newness and growth.
So another thought I had while I was contemplating the scoring matrices was that you could have the same scoring matrix for the community services programs, but you could add bonus points if they were seed or a new program or new initiative. I don't know what the committee feels about that, but that would certainly, you know, if you have a renewal project or you're significantly enhancing your program or service, then you could get up to 10 extra bonus points. But otherwise, all of the other criteria remains consistent.
Well, I think as Dominique has already pointed out, I think it's important somewhere within the scoring matrix that we're able to recognize innovation or new or expanded or something. And whether it's through a bonus or as she's already indicated through the criteria, you need to identify what those criteria are. No matter how it's done, as long as it's done.
Mm-hmm.
I would disagree with the bonus because we have defined it as a core objective to the point of making it the title of the grant program. So because if we say bonus, that means we're willing to accept applications that don't have a strong element of reflection, renewal, evolution. So it has to be to me, it's not a bonus. It's a core.
Great. Would you like to assign bonus points to any first-time applicants?
No.
Okay. I ask only because we do that for the community improvement project or plan. So.
Well, if you're going to, I think as Dominique has pointed out, if you're going to define something as innovative or whatever else in the criteria, then I don't think you need to have the bonusing.
Okay. Great.
Even as a
disagree.
teacher, I've never been in favor of bonus points philosophically.
Yeah. Sally, you had something to
I was
offer?
just going to say, somewhere in the matrix, then there should be a spot, first time applying, or totally new, or first time applying, and that should be worth certain points that only will be going to the people who are first time appliers, which will help them, get a better score.
I thought it might have been captured somehow, yeah, in the seed component, so to speak. But I understand your point, Sally.
That can be just a new event that the same group are sponsoring. I think someone who's applying for the first time ever should be given like 5 points or some such thing on the scoring matrix. Just because it is hard to break in. when other groups have been getting it for years, and we're trying to encourage more groups to apply that have never applied before.
Okay.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, I think we would satisfy that if we had separate scoring matrices for each of the 4 program streams. So
Right.
seed applicants would only be evaluated against other seed applicants,
Okay.
grow applicants, et cetera. So that helps keep the program divided, and the committee would then assign the grants accordingly. So you could see all of the submissions that have come in, and then, as you've done in previous years, allocate certain funds to certain streams.
Right.
And that way, the seed programs, they're only evaluated against other first-time applicants or new initiatives or innovative programs and services anyways.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think what Sally's getting at is, though, is the comparator between the first-time applicants and the established applicants. And I know you're working a way through it and trying to find a way to do it. It still gets very subjective for the committee to decide how to allocate those particular funds between the group or to the groups. So it could be challenging, not insurmountable, but challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Does that give you the feedback you need on that section, Julie?
Yes, yes. So I think we can come up with some scoring matrices for the committee's review based on that
Thank you.
feedback. And perhaps even some recommendations about how to ensure that first-time applicants are treated fairly in this process. So I'll give more thought to that as well and come back with some recommendations. So reporting is next. And I just wanted to make sure, again, I'm cognizant of the fact that we don't want to become this process to be too onerous for the applicants, but I wanted to check in with committee members about the reporting requirements for the applicants, and if this seems reasonable to the committee.
Does this suggest, Julie, that they need to submit the financial statements with the applicant as well as with the final report?
Yes.
You're assuming a budget. I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah. So we want to be able to do a quick financial analysis just to make sure that, in particular for the community services agencies, that the funding will be directed as indicated in the application. So it would be hard to justify supporting additional funds to an organization, let's say, who had hundreds of thousands of dollars in reserves, or
Right.
So that's what we were trying to catch here.
I'm wondering if I may add the, oh, hold on 1 second.
Apparently she's not going to add.
It's okay, we can circle back. Oh,
Sorry about that. Just in terms of outcomes, so you have the second bullet is statistics and metrics, results of measurable outcomes. And I don't know realistically to what extent all applicants will have access to statistics and metrics, but also later on, 2/3 of the way down, it says outcome evaluation report. So to me, that's a bit of a repeat. So maybe I would keep the one you have 2/3 of the way down, say outcome evaluation report, as a sub bullet to say statistic and metrics available.
Yep.
So I think we do want to encourage, but realistically, again, it's what's possible.
I agree.
Great. So we
So
move it
Julie,
down.
again, is this duplicative information that's required for both the application date or application process as well as the final report? Yeah, I'm not, am I understanding this correctly? Because I'm not understanding why we want to know what the valid certificate of insurance is at the final outcome. We don't want to know this going into it. You understand what I'm getting at?
I do, yes.
Okay,
So the last two bullets certainly wouldn't apply. And
All
that
right,
is
thank you.
a great catch. And in terms of reporting, I think it would be a template form that we create based on the criteria listed here. Just to, again, to get rid of some of the text that's included in this and make it more intuitive for the applicants. So we're
Yes.
just checking in to make sure that they know what required attachments are listed, and then perhaps we could elaborate on the outcome and evaluation piece and statistical information or metrics that we were hoping to gather, again, for the committee's review. But certainly the valid certificate of insurance really applies to the events and festivals piece and needs to be reinforced through the application and general criteria. So we'll remove that. And then special conditions, I think that does still apply to the evaluation report. Because if it was a new program or initiative and the committee hoped to get some specific information as follow-up after the program or event to determine success, we'd want to include that in the conditions for funding and the funding agreement. And so this special conditions as required, the committee may wish to keep that there just for flexibility.
okay.
So in terms of the application, we're envisioning a hybrid model. So individuals could apply online, and then it would be a fillable PDF, and we'd have a dedicated landing page just for the grant program. Alternatively, individuals could access grant materials and application forms through the county by contacting us. We'd mail out the application form. They could fill out a hard copy. We'd also have printable copies of the application guidelines and forms available online. We'd promote it through social media, et cetera. So does that application process, the hybrid model, seem okay? Okay.
From my perspective, yes, because it's precludes the opportunity of leaving someone behind.
Yes. Yes. And then terms and conditions. These were the sorts of terms and conditions that we would include in the funding agreement. So when they're signing off on receiving funds from the county, these are the terms that we would ask them to sign off on. Any feedback on the terms and conditions?
I think it looks,
Great.
Thank you.
So the application, sorry, did I speak over someone?
Nope, I just sneezed.
Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
The application, the draft application is included next in your package. And we did receive some feedback from Councillor Giguère, and we've noted that. Thank you. My only concern was about the length of the application. As I was drafting it, I just kept going and going with more questions. So is the application form reflective of what the committee would like in terms of a submission from an organization? Is there more or less that we could be including in this application form?
Well, I don't want it to be too onerous in my opinion, but at the same time, we're talking about some free money here that they have to be willing to work for it a little bit. And, so there is that aspect of it. When you read through it, it does look first daunting. And if I was to fill it out, I'd be a little hesitant to begin with, but it is a maximum of 200 words. It's not saying a minimum of 200 words. It could be a one-word answer, in respect. So it may not be as onerous as you think.
I think the main thing that's important is for the application to be a framework by which all of the organizations will provide their customized answers, and that as long as everybody's using the same consistent application, we're still going to get, as a committee, we're still going to get the picture based on these points.
Yep.
There may be room for just a little bit of tweaking, because there's one question. I think there are 3 questions that talk about outcomes and impact. So impact and outcomes can be seen as the same. So I would watch for that. And it's hard to do right now over online because with no numbers. So I think it's easy to search and see how many times we have the word outcome. And there's one question that talks about impact, but in the same sentence also talks about accessibility. So
Yeah.
I would parse that. Probably don't need to talk about impact. It sounds like the real focus of that question is about how widely accessible are the services or events. So I would say just have a final look to make sure there's no repetition. And not to double barrel questions, because then that's more difficult for the applicants and more difficult for the adjudicators.
Certainly, and I might have another look at the application based on the evaluation criteria so that we could kind of use subheadings for our own purposes for the scoring matrix to make sure that there's alignment with a consistent number of questions in each kind of evaluation bucket that we're considering, and make sure that there's alignment across those three tools.
Yeah, and it's very common to start, in fact, with your assessment matrix first and then design the application. And that way you ensure that you're not asking any questions and any work of the applicants that in fact is not going to be assessed. So absolutely, whichever sequence you end up doing it, there should be a perfect match. And either way, there's a chance we forget to assess something that they've provided, or we've asked too much that in fact we won't plan to assess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So the next section is budget information, and we'll ask for the organization's budget, the initiative budget information, and then we provided an application checklist, which again, we'll have to circle back and make sure that it actually aligns with the process as laid out in this document, a declaration and signatures to sign off the application.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've included tab 1, which is the community signage program. And at the beginning of our meeting, I noted that we are missing the signage application. And as established through today's discussions, we know that we would have a separate booklet for this program. So we'll make sure that the scoring information, the program information, as well as the application is included in that package. And then the committee did identify a couple of areas that are required for inclusion in the glossary. And I think as we go through the document and have a more complete, even staff review of this document, which didn't take place in advance of the committee's review of this, we'll make sure that we have a complete glossary and have identified any words or phrases that need to be further defined or clarified based on some of the evaluation criteria that the committee will be using, just so that it's clear for the applicants. So that, Mr. Chairman, wraps up the draft proposal that we've prepared for the committee. We would be happy to do some more work on this, again, very quickly in order to achieve the July 14th timeline for council.
Right.
So perhaps, well, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether you'd like to schedule another meeting. My only recommendation would be that in order to ensure that this is included in council's agenda package, the meeting would have to take place before Monday or on
Yes.
Monday.
Okay, my feeling is personally that there's been enough feedback, go back to you to draft. This is going to council for ultimate approval. Members of that council, this committee, with the exception of Heather, will have opportunity to offer comment through the council process. I don't see a need for us to meet again. Is the plan to circulate, well, for example, Heather as well, a copy of the revisions so that should she have any concerns, she could communicate through us and we could carry that message to council? Is that fair for committee members to operate that way?
I'm happy with that.
Okay,
More fair. I'm happy with that.
okay. Sally, you're good with that process?
Yes, are we going to include the matrix in it, or is that something we'll work on later?
Julie?
So I think we will include some sort of matrix in this grant proposal, but I will be sure to include, in terms of council's consent, you're really just looking for them to consent to a revised community grant program administration process. And then I will note that the committee will meet again to discuss the scoring matrices and to do further refinement on the program. But really, because we only have one council meeting in July and one in August, I have concerns about the amount of work that has to happen in between. And so I want to make sure that council agrees with the decision of the committee and we can really get going on setting up the webpage, setting up the individual tools and documents. So I may even pare down this proposal and give them an idea of what the scoring matrix used by the committee could look like. And again, indicate that the committee may wish to refine that further in July.
Okay, I think that's
Well,
fair.
that's fine with me. Yep.
Good. All right, that's good. Thank you. Look forward to your revisions. So having gotten through section 3, let's move on with the correspondence from the Elgin Plowmen's Association. Do we need to just note that, Julie? We don't need to formally receive that, do we?
So I think you do have to receive it, and I would also recommend that you rescind the motion from your previous meeting and have a new motion, which doesn't include that funding in the recommendation.
Well, Julie, if I go back to the minutes, the way it's read, that the Elgin County Plowmen's Association be granted $200 contingent on the event going forward in 2020. We received notice that they're not going forward, so we don't have to, I believe, rescind and redo. But to receive the correspondence, I think that's fair. I could look for a mover and a seconder for that.
I'll move
I
that.
agree.
Correspondence.
Okay, Heather, did you move that? And did you second that, Dave?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So moved by Heather and seconded by Dave. Call the question.
Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes,
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah,
Yes.
Heather Dirks.
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. So now we're moving on to the date of the next meeting. You were suggesting sometime in July, Julie. Any recommendations?
Perhaps the week of the 22nd. Do we have one set up for June? Oh, sorry, I'm looking at June. My apologies. So the week of the 20th?
That's fine with me. We can tentatively set it for the week of the 20th. How's everyone's calendar looking?
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I've got two meetings. I've got two on the 5th, one on the 21st, which is short. I'm sorry, I got three on the 20th. But the 22nd and 22nd, I'm completely clear, the Wednesday. The 23rd, I'm clear in the afternoon.
Dominique?
Yeah, I'm available 22nd, 23rd, 24th.
Okay, 22nd, does that suit most people then? That's a Wednesday, right?
Chairman, can I ask a question?
You can.
Can I just ask how the link is being shared? Because I can't see the link.
Well, it's interesting because it usually comes over the calendar, right, Julie?
Yes.
And I know that for me, ends up on my iPad, and then I copy it over to my BAM email, and sometimes I can ferret the link out, sometimes I can't. But yeah, it's a challenge sometimes getting these links.
Maybe if she doesn't have Outlook.
Yeah, it could be confusing because, or less effective, Heather, because if you don't have Outlook.
I have
okay. So any suggestions in terms of how we could send the link to individuals to help it to ensure that you're getting the appropriate information? It's really hit or miss. We find some people never have an issue and other people have issues. So.
Well, I'm assuming that we're discussing the 22nd or whatever date moving forward. It will be in electronic format. Okay.
Maybe a suggestion would be to send the link in with the agenda package. So in the email, so it could be copied from the calendar invitation, because even depending on your desktop interface, sometimes you have to switch to the calendar view of your email. So it is always there. So that's, but if it's easier to access it through email, perhaps after the invitation is sent, sending it with the package.
Just one problem that I have, I was speaking with Ollie the other day, is every time I receive an invitation to a meeting and I accept it, it goes to trash because it's in my calendar, but the rest of it's in trash. So if I want to look up the agenda, I'd have to go to trash because the other puts it automatically in trash when I accept it.
Julie, maybe if you want to try sending it to my OFA email, that might be easier instead of my personal.
Sure.
Okay, that's great. So we're contemplating then a tentative date of the July 22nd. Is that what I'm hearing?
Fine with me. What time?
That's my next question. What's good for people? Would you rather do it right after lunch or do it first thing in the morning?
I prefer the morning if it's possible, but I don't care. I'm willing either way.
Okay. I assume the warden's got the busier schedule of all of us. I didn't quite catch that, but.
Morning is fine for me. It's Dominique.
All right. Do you want to tentatively set for 9 a.m.? And if as time gets closer, if a conflict arises, we will do something with that time then. Okay. So July 22nd, 20 at 9 a.m. Okay. Any other business? A lot of material was covered today, a lot longer than I anticipated, but I think it was worthwhile. Hearing none, then I would seek a motion for adjournment.
So moved, Sally.
Sally moves. Dominique seconds. We'll go for a recorded vote now.
Warden Mennel. Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchum. Heather Dirks.
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Canada Day.
You too.
Yep. Same to you, Ed.
Same to you. Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.
So Julie, we're going on to the teleconference call with Grant.
Yes, you are.
Julie has just